So, I mean, you sort of touched on this lightly, but I think if we can go a little further about, when this is a delicate balance because we're talking about trying to move away from just the causational models, but the when, and I think a lot of us can relate, is like, granted, most of our parents did not have the manual. And then I remember my parents actually saying that to me. They're like, well, we didn't have a manual. Uh, Little did they know there's thousands
But
of books.
Scott, there's been now you're generation younger than I am, but my parents believed that the pediatrician, the physician, had the manual,
Yeah,
and they were very deferent to
yeah,
those people. But those people had no clue. It wasn't part of their training about human development. And even being a pediatrician, there was no schooling in terms of development or much about maturation.
yeah.
So they were deferring to people whom they thought were experts, but the experts didn't have the manual.
No, no, it's so true. It's so true. I mean, yeah, I mean, we've come a long way about even models were about trusting the internal process as a
Oh,
parent in nonviolent parenting.
that's interesting question, like listening to your body. Well, I think that's an important role that we need to be more sensitive to, but it doesn't mean that you have to respond every time your body is telling you something. You have to say to your body or say to yourself, well, I hear it coming, but I have to get this done and I'll treat it well in a few hours. But I
Yeah,
will treat it well. I will go out, I'll walk around, I'll go to the ocean, or I'll smell the breeze, or I'll pet my cat or do something. Um, but what we end up doing is saying, I need to suppress it today. And then you wake up tomorrow and you say, I need to suppress it today. And you keep doing that. And our body starts to turn off its feedback loops.
yeah,
And then we're in trouble.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'd like to just shift back to the piece, and I think this will weave in, is about destiny, essentially. Because I think, as you're saying, you uh, how does our when the absence of co-regulation,
Mm.
which we're talking about, does have a relationship to the concept of trust and love in that way, when there is a absence of that in our early
Mm.
developmental experience, what, where does that lead us?
Well, it leads us into risky places. It leads us into addiction. It leads us to risk behaviors. It leads us to numbness of our body, like listening to our body.
Yeah,
But the part of the optimistic part of the story is that many of these things are, I would say, state related. So they can be modified.
yeah,
It's not like, I mean, there's a great interest in neuroplasticity, and people start getting very concerned. Oh, I've been rewired. I can't change it. And the answer is you're misreading what it means. The issue is this is where polyvagal theory comes in, because we talk about different underlying states. And this is where a neuroception of safety shift state, a neuroception of danger shift state, and a neuroception of life threat shuts you down. But those changes in physiological state are really driven by our neuroception, by information that literally fits templates that we've inherited, cues of safety, so that we can develop strategies to regulate our states to become into a more accessible state in the right environment. And it's that latter point that becomes critical. And I think where you were going, Scott, is how do we drive our own ship? And the
or
answer is there's
yeah,
top down and bottom up, and they meet in the brainstem. And your awareness is different than your bottom up. Your awareness of the world and the relationships to your body can be have validity or it can be confabulation. And anyone in the therapeutic world knows that the narrative or the story is may have some validity to it, but it certainly has a visceral truth to it. So in a sense, we have to understand that we are really held together by our story. And but the point I want to make is our body is sending cues and we have options of listening to it or not. And when people start having severe let's say the consequence of poor attachment, which is I think where you started, is that the child's not getting sufficient co-regulation by the parent, which means that the connection between higher brain structures, meaning our cognitive, our emotional world from our brain, how we perceive or react to the world, and our body become slightly disconnected, and maybe more than slightly. And it's when we are in a safe, supportive environment, these systems are, in a sense, synergistically working together. So we literally are co-regulated on a metaphor between the brain and the body are co-regulating. They're sending up signals, they're being interpreted, and they're regulating. And we have to actually take that co-regulation as a metaphor within our internal state. Because if we're not co-regulating, we're turning off accessibility to certain neural pathways. And so if our body's in a state of chronic threat and it's sending cues upward, we can't access certain areas, at least access efficiently certain areas of our brain. So it's going to compromise our cognitive, our executive function, our decision making. It's going to compromise our ability to accurately interpret other people's intentionality. So we know that occurs. That's quite obvious. You can see that in any interaction in which a person gets upset. They're not even seeing you or listening to you with any accuracy, but their body is telling them that this is a threatening environment or results in some level of aggression. But our storyline is that the aggression is someone earned it. It's really, it's an entitlement because the person feels bad. Obviously, they didn't feel bad by themselves. You did that. And in a sense, we all need to learn a greater toolkit of regulating others and also regulating ourselves. And I think that it's the latter point, regulating oneself, that gets into this notion of intentionality. In the world that I'm trying to describe, in which neuroception has cues of safety or threat, we are not aware of what those cues are, but we need to become aware of what those cues do to our body. So you have to use our body literally as a polygraph, that our awareness of our own physiology tells us that we're responding to threat, even though we don't know what the threat is. So if we threw out the word anxiety and said, my body's in a chronic state of threat, how do I talk to my body to downregulate those states of threat? As opposed to saying, I have to get this paper done. I have to get this talk done. I have to get this grant done. I have to do this work. But once that's done, I'll feel fine. People who have these artificial points that are benchmarks, that they'll just push the can down the road. They'll keep themselves moving because their body is now used to being in this hypermobilized defensive mode, and they're in a sense held together by their anxiety or held together by their body being in a state of threat.
Yeah. Dude, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, I want to just sort of reiterate and name, this is the complication certainly between being in the realm, understanding the physiology and where we want to go, and then navigating the complexity of the humans and the stories and the script that get layered on, which make it much more challenging to just get back to the physiological process.
Scott, you're saying again, I'm going to unpack what you said, my term. So the issue is we have to understand that we're humans. We have to know what it is to be a human. And the manual wasn't given to our parents, and we don't have the manual. But what it means is that when we respond to threat, our body does something. We have to know that. And we have to know that there are toolkits that are easily learned or reasonably easily learned that take us out of states of threat, assuming that we're not truly in a dangerous environment. Now, many individuals, especially during the pandemic, have been living in environments that are really extremely challenging. Remember, all the people have been self-quarantined, all the kids, and the assumption is that they're with their loving family. Now, many families are not loving, and many families are under great stress during the pandemic. Food insecure, financially insecure, housing insecure, and all these things now get reflected on the child, even if the parents are heroically trying to deal with it. Their bodily state is being broadcast to their kids. So the point is that we have to, in a sense, learn that how we feel is reflected in who we are, how we act, how we speak, and how we interact with our family.
Yeah. My turn to unpack. Uh, no. So I want to just draw a through line, and I know that I can feel it in the room. We're like, what's the toolkit?
Oh,
So we'll get to the toolkit. We'll get to the tool. Let's see people dancing, ready for the tools. There's and I have a question that might bring us directly to the toolkit, which is, so we start when there's challenges of co-regulation, and so there's a perpetual experience of threat because there isn't the co-regulation help mediate it. And then here's the question around love: is how much from this perspective, how much capacity, if we're in a state of threat, is there for love and co-regulation?
Well, okay, so you know the answer.
I know,
So you don't have to ask me. And I think I wrote a paper, and I can share it with you, and you can share it with the group. It was about the pandemic. It was a paradox to our nervous system because the pandemic is a threat.
Yeah.
But the normal mitigating factors for threats have been social interaction. But then we were social distancing, so we took away the major toolkit to regulate our fear and our threat, which was to interact with others. And this created great challenges and left us with Zoom, and which is better than nothing. This is really what I wrote. It's better than nothing, but it's not the same as going to Starbucks or having a drink or doing something with a person. So the toolkit, okay, so I want to put one final thing on the pandemic. And I've realized that, I'm vaccinated, but I'm not comfortable in groups of people anymore. Now, I'm saying this to a group of people on Zoom, and I haven't traveled since a year ago last March, and I'm not looking forward to traveling. I'm not traveling in 2021. I made that decision. But the part is that my nervous system, my autonomic nervous system, retuned. So where I used to really enjoy that weekend walk through Costco with all the people and all the activity, I go there and I'm totally overwhelmed. It's too much for me. So or I go out now, we go out with a couple or once in a while, and at 8:30, I'm ready to go back and go to bed. It's like, okay, enough social for the day. My nervous system is not what it was a couple of years ago. And the point is, I think we have to learn about how this has dealt with us. So I was on a podcast and someone asked me how I was going to get out of this. And I thought for a moment, and then I realized that the things that I like the most in socializing is having house guests. Now I'm inviting everyone to visit me, but the idea was that I'll get out of this by having people visit. And, we've had a couple and it's exhausting to me. So it's like, I am what I talk about. And since I've been retuned, and now I have to, since become something, I have to become what I was. And so one of the toolkits, of course, is to be present with another and to have social interactions. And I wanted to, in a sense, give people one other one. Now, remember the underlying theme of our sociality and our evolutionary journey to sociality is this ventral vagal system that adaptively and can reflexively turn off threat reactions. Can we grab it? Is there some behavioral thing that we have agency to, in a sense, grab that system? And the answer is yes. And this is where slow exhalations turn on that vagal brake and slow inhalations turn it off. So we can literally exercise the turning on and off of that brake to give our body a sense of, almost a sense of secure resilience through breathing.
Mm.
And in part, that's why when we are in discussions and we're well listened to, we are able to extend the durations of our phrases, which is the same thing as slow exhalations. It's like singing or playing a wind instrument.